very happy to have this panel together as one of the organizers on it, and just wanted to introduce Howard Morgan, who we invited to be the moderator. He's a highly respected venture capitalist, founder of First Round Capital, which does a lot of early stage, I believe. He previously was heavily involved in Idea Lab. He spent a significant amount of time in the more distant past at the Wharton School in computer science and I think decision sciences. So he's got an extremely broad background in the information technology space and obviously in the entrepreneurial space. So we're very happy to have Howard here as our moderator.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here tonight and to be helping to lead this panel of some really great people who've been involved in monetizing digital offerings, which is what we're going to talk about tonight. It is something that's interested me for many years. I first got on the internet in 1973 with Machine 50 at the University of Pennsylvania, and one of the things that got me in trouble back in the early 70s was I started one of the Usenet list groups. Before it was Usenet, there were ARPANET groups on wine because I love wines. And then Senator Proxmire and the Golden Fleece Awards were coming out, and the ARPA administrator said, you cannot have a wine list on this government-sponsored network. We're going to get in big trouble. And however, it was a list that was able to be monetized because people wanted to buy the California wines. Us people on the East Coast wanted to get the California wines that we couldn't get, and our California friends would send it to us. So e-commerce monetization, but the content was all about the wine reviews, and that was the first stuff that we needed to see. So we have a great panel tonight. I'll introduce them for a minute now, and then they'll say more about themselves after I give you a couple of minutes of talk. First, to my left is Paul Smurl, who's Vice President at the New York Times.com. He's Vice President for for paid products, I guess is the title. And of course, I, being a crossword puzzle nut, have been a paid subscriber for the New York Times for many years, ever since they started making me pay for the crossword puzzles. And fortunately, this year when they put up the other paywalls, I was able to, some advertiser was nice enough to let me to pay for my subscription for the rest of the stuff that I need to see this year. But
that's ending soon.
That's ending soon. Yeah, I know. And before that, he had a checkered past, which is to say attorney and management consultant, helping a lot of companies in the telecom industry. To his left is Shawn Price from Zuora. And Shawn has been in the startup world for a long time. He's done and built and sold a bunch of startups in the digital world, including IPOs, including acquisitions, and including a stint on my side of the table as a venture capitalist, or at least working out as an entrepreneur in residence to try to do it. And he realized, as he said to me earlier, that he prefers the operating side of the world. I prefer the venture side, where I can be a critic and not have to take responsibility on the operations side. Next is Betsy Morgan, one of the many famous Morgans in our internet world. None of us related by blood, but all of us related by what we do and love. And Betsy currently is president of The Blaze, which is an information network. It's content creation with a bunch of interesting content creators, fostering a real interaction where people can debate issues. And of course, one of their key contributors is somebody who generates a lot of such debate. And Betsy spent a lot of years at CBS, where she was head of CBS Interactive, CBS News.com, a whole bunch of things in the internet world. She's got a lot of experience that I'm sure will benefit from. And finally, one of the organizers of this evening, Richard Reisman. And Richard, started in the digital world in Standard & Poor's and the Dow Jones Corporation, but since then has been chief technologist for things like Health Scout, and has been very active in the whole question of how do you connect people, how do you get them to pay for what you're going to connect them to, and how do you get the digital products to them. And he's president of Teleshuttle Corporation. So let me tell you about the issues that we want to talk about tonight. And they really stem from something that was realized as we started getting lots of content on the internet. And that is that digital offerings are very different than physical offerings. Nick Negroponte, an old MIT professor, wrote his book in the mid-90s, Being Digital, when you can exchange bits for atoms and atoms for bits. And the problem is that reproduction of digital content is pretty close to free. And Stuart Brand, back in the early 80s, also late 70s, came out with the Whole Earth Catalog and said information wants to be free, a phrase that a lot of people have cloned over the years, Esther Dyson among others. The problem is producing content isn't free. The people creating the information want to be paid, whether they're music artists, whether they're performers, whether they're writers, whether they're editors who help shape what the writers have created. They're not going to do that work for free forever. Certainly, they're doing more of it for free today than they ever did before. The whole world of user-generated content out there is trying to create a sort of Gresham's law. Cheap content drives out the deer, the good content. But the good content has real value and needs to find a model by which the creators of that good content can get paid. So new models are needed, and that's kind of what we're going to be looking at and talking about tonight. And it differs in different verticals because there are some areas where the time from creation of information till the consumption of the information is important. Bloomberg does pretty well, and that information isn't free. I mean, it kind of is if you get it 30 minutes later or 15 minutes later. But if you want that information, as some of my high-speed trading friends do, in 800 nanoseconds or 20 microseconds, you pay a lot. If you want world news and those kind of things, a little bit harder. Music, certainly Shawn Parker and Sean Fanning, when they created Napster, didn't really do it to kill the music industry as a business, but it certainly had the effect of changing dramatically the economics of what was going on. And changing, by the way, not for the first time, the models of the music industry. I mean, remember, the music industry went through sheet music and performances, and there was a huge strike in the 40s. There's a whole period in the 40s where there was no recorded music with bands because they were of a strike, because the unions didn't like the fact that when you had a record, it got played on the air and they weren't getting paid, even though they had made the sounds in the first place. Same thing with movies and video. Now, we're seeing it even more in the app world. You pick up your phone of choice, and you have a choice of 500,000, probably 1 million apps pretty soon, many of which are, quote, free. That is to say, they don't charge you directly the first time you use them. And the question there is, how do we make money there? And similarly also with lots of services. So we need models. We need lots of models. And those are what we're going to talk about. The simplest model is the pay model. And that says you want information, you pay for it. If you're Bloomberg, you can get away with that. If you're Thomson Reuters, you can get away with that pretty easily. If you're selling a physical product based on that information, you can often get away with that, which is to say the New York Times, which I buy in the paper world quite often, whereas the Wall Street Journal, I almost never buy the paper version of it. But the pay model still does work for lots of information, and I think will for quite some time to come. Certainly, the pay model for listening to music at a concert works. The pay model for owning a CD works. But a little bit later on, sometime in mid-2000s, Fred Wilson, among others, coined the term freemium model, which is to say you can have some information for free, and then if you want the better stuff, whatever better means, whether it's higher quality in the case of music perhaps, or more service in the case of services, you have to pay. Then there's the notion of having some of it with a paywall, and there's all sorts of paywalls, and you'll hear more about that. There's the notion of value pricing, which is to, as we talk about with financial information, the value of the information may decay in a lot of different ways. It may decay by place, by time. If I'm in Europe and I want soccer scores right away, if I want to run a fantasy football league, the information about what's going on in sports may be very highly valuable to me. For somebody who really doesn't much care about and is not playing fantasy football, they don't really need all that detailed football information, so they're getting less value from the same information. Maybe we can price differentially to those people. There's all this stuff at shareware, which has suggested prices along with it. So you take the shareware, and then maybe you pay for it, and maybe you don't pay for it. It depends on whether you get any real use of it. And some of the shareware has a 30-day trial period, and some of it has an unlimited trial period. So all of those things, and then of course, honor systems. Pay what you think it's worth. In some sense, pay cooperatively. If you tell other people about this, we'll make you pay less. If you help promote this product, this service, this application, you'll pay less. We'll give you coupons and various kinds. So lots of different interesting models of how to get you information with a lighter touch than just demanding payment up front. Then there's a question of consumption. How do you measure consumption of information? With the New York Times, I buy the paper in the morning and I get 4 sections or 5 some days and a certain number of pages. I don't pay by the page because that costs me $2 whether it's the Saturday little thin paper or the pretty thick ones typically on Thursdays. But I might pay in a lot of services for how long I'm on them, for how much I'm consuming in the way of bytes. For a lot of services, I pay by the number of users, by the number of devices, by the number of seats. Of course, the way I pay for most of what I'm doing on the internet is with my time. And that time is typically measured in page views or clicks or some measure alongside on the internet and how those things are used. So trying to figure out what a good model is for a particular kind of information, a kind of digital content, is a pretty interesting problem for companies. Now, at First Round Capital, we have about 130 investments, 45 of them in the New York area, and about 40 of them are pretty much pure information. There's a bunch that are e-commerce companies like Fab.com and Microsoft, but there's a bunch of them that are really doing a lot of information selling, and this is a critical issue for us. If you do get revenue, you got to split it up, and you got to split it up among a bunch of people. You split it up among the creators of that content, among the aggregators of the content, the publishers, the people other players who aggregate audiences who may not be publishers, but maybe people like Facebook. They've aggregated a large audience. They're not quite a publisher, if you will. So how do those splits work? Who has the power in the world when those splits are being created? We have a number of companies in the ad tech world, and in the ad tech world, it's really interesting to see how an advertisement's CPM gets sliced up between what the advertiser pays to an agency, which pays it to an ad network, which pays it to an App Nexus, one of our companies, for optimizing the stuff, which then pays it, some of it to a publisher and some of it to an aggregator. So splitting up all that revenue is kind of an interesting question. So it's that's kind of the stage on which we're thinking. And now let me let the different panelists here talk about it. Then we'll have some questions, and then we'll have discussions. So let me lead off with Paul. And why don't you come on up and talk for a little bit.
Okay. So I don't have anything prepared specifically, but I thought it might make sense to take you through a little bit of the journey we took to get to our decision to charge for content. And it was a long one. I'll take you back to sort of 16 years ago when we first launched the website. We actually started at that time asking international users to pay for access to content on the site. So this is way back when. And the thinking there was these folks obviously, there's a demand, built-in demand there for our content, and they don't have access to us through other means because we are typically not distributing the print product, at least in a timely way, internationally, or weren't at the time. And that experiment lasted for about 6 months, maybe as much as 12 months. We had a few thousand subscribers, but ultimately we sort of decided, look, we want to build an audience here. This is a relatively new product, and so let's open this up to both international users and domestic users. Then flash forward to 2005 or so. We launched a product that put a paywall around our opinion content, our op-ed content. It was a hard paywall called Time Select, and that business did very well for us. We had several 100,000 subscribers. We were up to about a $10 million run rate before we decided to shut that down in 2007. The thinking there was what we could gain from advertising, from the traffic that we would generate by opening up this content more broadly in the open web was worth more than what we would make, the 10 million or 12 million we'd make in subscription revenue. And so we made a decision to tear down this product, tear down the wall, having done the experiment, and moved along, thinking that the ad market would continue to grow and increase over the next several years, which it did. But in 2009, the issue came up again. We ran into a digital ad recession, as many of you may recall, and even between the time of 1996 and 2009, we had sort of internally this struggle going on about whether we should charge for digital content. Because when you have a paid product, the print product out there, and you are offering a free way for people to obtain the same content, there's an obvious tension in terms of the business model and the economics of the business. But in 2009, this sort of came to a head again. And we asked ourselves the question, can we find a way to sort of make this work? We should do an exploration of this. And we were sort of saying, do we think the premium advertising model is sustainable for us? You may remember CPM. There was enormous pressure on CPMs in 2009. It was kind of unclear where that was headed. And we came to the conclusion that, at least for us, it was probably sustainable, maybe not at the same rate of growth that we had seen in the past, but that as a premium publisher, we had what it took to differentiate in the ad marketplace and continue to charge a premium rate. But we also asked ourselves the question whether we could also add an end-user revenue stream, because two revenue streams are better than one. Most media companies are built on both subscription and advertising revenue, and we needed to sort of ask the question and go further. We then embarked on a sort of year-long process of doing research, and the first piece of research that we did was with our users, our loyal, engaged users, and asked them if they'd be willing to pay. The response we got back was sort of overwhelming, so overwhelming that we were surprised by it and didn't necessarily trust what we were hearing, seeing in the data, so we did it again, and we got a very consistent, sort of similar response from our readers about their willingness to pay and the price, or prices they might be willing to pay. And so it became clear to us that this was something we might want to act on. What was unclear to us was how we strike the balance between a business, a pretty big advertising business that we had built over these 15 years, and preserve that and grow that, while at the same time trying to build and grow a digital subscription business. And so our past experiments were sort of these very hard walls that existed around content or around communities. And we didn't think that was going to work here. We didn't think that putting a hard wall up would help us preserve inventory, our influence online, and our advertising business. But as Howard was alluding to at the outset, a lot changed between kind of 2005 and 2009, technically speaking, and also in terms of consumer mindset. On the technical side, it was a lot more easy to think about ways like a freemium approach or a metered approach to enable that. This metering that we do on our site, and I'll get into the model in a minute, really sort of allowed us to think about how you could achieve that balance, kind of have your cake and eat it too. And so also from a consumer mindset perspective, you saw people getting conditioned to this idea of paying for music, of paying for apps. That was just starting to, sort of come to the fore, and we have Apple and others to thank for that. And so it seemed like it was the right time. And as I said, we spent the better part of a year continuing to do research around this, and we came to the conclusion that we could. It was a push, economically speaking. We thought, as we look back on it now, we realize that model was too conservative because it's been a great business for us so far. But at the time, we were making a strategic bet that this is where we want to go. We want to take the company and ideally the industry into paid content for general interest news and information. Obviously, Wall Street Journal, FT, and others have been out there charging for business information, news and information. But there weren't a lot of folks out there charging for general interest news. And the sense was, very strong sense was, if you do that, you're going to tank your advertising business, you're going to tank your traffic, you're going to become irrelevant, et cetera, et cetera. So there was a lot of risk involved, but we felt pretty confident based on our modeling and research that we could figure out the right balance. The balance we chose was to allow for readers to read up to 20 metered articles a month for free before encountering a pay gate, at which point we ask people to subscribe. If they choose not to subscribe, we still very much want them to be part of the franchise, obviously, and encourage them to come back the next month for their next allotment of free content. We're also open to the web, and so we're available. You can access our content through search. When a blogger refers to us on social media, you'll never risk encountering the gateway through those paths into the site. And what we found is we've sort of struck the right balance, at least so far. We have not seen nearly the decline in uniques, in page views that we were expecting, and we've actually continued to grow our advertising business. How is that possible? Well, in part because there is a fair amount of unsold inventory in most publishers' ad businesses that gets sold at remnant rates. And so if you can protect the direct sold inventory, you're protecting 80, 90% of your advertising business. And if you can somehow try to continue to monetize the remnant inventory and you grow as the market grows, you can grow your advertising business, and that's what we've seen. And at the same time, we've built the subscription business. So the 20 article limit, which we sort of backed into actually as a way to optimize the economics across the entire business, both print and digital, seems to be sort of a decent balancing point because we've sold hundreds of thousands of digital subscriptions, so enough people are encountering the gate. We continue to grow that business. And so far we're very pleased. I think one of the things that's struck us about the implementation that we didn't expect going in, two things really. One is what happened with the print business. So we kind of expected, believe it or not, that you'd see a lot of migration from print to digital when you put this very clear choice in front of people, even though digital had always been free prior to. When you put a clear choice in front of people to say, this is what you're paying for our print product, this is what you could be paying as a subscriber of our digital product, we thought we'd see more migration. In fact, we've seen just the opposite. People have, by sort of attaching, we've made digital free to home delivery subscribers. By attaching value, hundreds of dollars of value to that subscription, we've seen people stop canceling in large measure. I mean, our cancellation rates are down dramatically. We've seen a lot of people buy that product, and especially the Sunday product, because it gives you access, free access to our unlimited digital package, which is the most expensive digital package. And by buying the Sunday only, you basically can play a bit of arbitrage. You can buy the Sunday product and get all access as part of that. So the second thing that was kind of counterintuitive for us was the effect on the ad business. I mean, we were very scared about what could happen to the ad business and how advertisers would react. And we knew that it was important for us to say, look, we think you're going to get exactly what you get today, which is our audience, the impressions that we're guaranteeing for your ad buy, and the same brand and context that you know and love. And if we continue to deliver that, then there shouldn't be a problem. And we have been able to continue to deliver that to our direct sold advertisers. And at this point, it's really a non-event. And because 9-10 months into this, our audience figures, our page view numbers have not shown a dramatic decline, a very small decline, in fact, some year-over-year gains in some months. I think we've gained their confidence.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. It's nice to know that I can get to that content through search and bloggers for next year when I do need to pay for it. I'm sure of that. Okay, now Shawn Price from Zuora. Shawn.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. It's interesting to listen to the comments at the beginning, how much rate of change is occurring and how much I hear the word risk. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what we're seeing in the media industry today. And I live in what's called the subscription economy. And this is a broad shift that's occurring across multiple industries. And what's interesting, I think, is that 3 years ago, there were really three models of companies that were at scale doing subscriptions, particularly in technology. Think back, it was Salesforce, SuccessFactors, Taleo, and a couple of other companies. Now, what do I define as a subscription? $10 a month recurring, in my view, is not a subscription, and every company in this room can do that. Complex subscriptions, where we're adjusting the productization that we just heard about, is really what's driving how the consumer interacts with whether you're a digital content provider for a media player, you're a newspaper, you're a video provider, or you're a cloud infrastructure deliverer. There's no one model. I think that there's false hope if you think that it's an ad revenue, or you think that it's Apple, or you think that it's My Subscription Engine or any other. I think what we're seeing is that there's a radical shift towards the role of the consumer. If you don't own the consumer, you can't monetize. It's as simple as that. And so in Howard's opening comments around distribution and aggregators, who owns the consumer and what happens to them? Ad revenue is in decline in many, many cases. The Apple does a great job as a distribution engine, but I have many customers who have 40 million customers through Apple, but no monetization because they don't own that endpoint to be able to understand. If you'd like to think of a contrast, think of EA Sports, who sells cartridges to game suppliers, to end users with a smattering of online, and contrast that with Zynga. Zynga is an online play that learns dynamically consumer behavior and then builds products specific to that demand. That's where the media industry is going, particularly around monetization. It's through any device, at any time, in the way that we want. And I think this market is largely pre-configured. It's not a case of this is going to happen. It's already happened. How many of you in this room have more than one subscription outside of digital media or content? And you probably bought it in any number of varieties of ways. You probably started for free. This is a market that is rewarding earned loyalty, edition-based. As I consume the service and as I gain foothold in the service, I'm willing to give more. But that's not enough. I think the comments on Howard about the shelf life of content is a very interesting one, this notion of value-based. But the cadence of change is remarkable. I'm going to walk you through maybe 4 or 5 different models that are already in deployment today where the average rate of change on the pricing and packaging is more than 50 times in a given year. The challenge for media companies is to rethink who owns that content. What products can I now repurpose through any device? And where's the product management skill set that's no longer used to producing a thing, but is used to measuring a business in a new vocabulary and lexicon by which we run our businesses? Today we speak ACV, annual contract value, monthly recurring, total contract value, delta MRR, and we look at lifetime value of that subscription. And that is in flux. And most of the infrastructure that's been built was built around the distribution and shipping of things. Tell me where these systems count, not just subscribers, but how many subscriptions, amendment. And as you start to look at what Wall Street is doing, it's rewarding subscription businesses with 6 times greater market cap than an on-premise or traditional business. And so churn defense becomes really important. Not only is it about customer acquisition and serving them in the way they want through any device at any time, but it's also about preventing that churn. This is not a CRM problem. This is not a problem for your content management. This is not a problem for your ERP or your distribution. This is a net new category of lifecycle management around subscription. And we need to remove the friction there. So the big question is, how do you think out of the box to monetize these digital offerings and in what way? And we've heard a lot about freemium offers, but I talked to you a little bit about Box. They've changed their pricing and packaging 50 times in the last year alone. They have 5 million users and 60,000 businesses monetized in the last 3 years. But what's interesting is they're not B2B, they're not B2C, they're actually B to any. I may start with a subscription, and as a corporation, as Zuora, my head of European operations may be buying things on a credit card, but I, as the provider, want aggregation. And so it's not just a freemium, it's freemium to lifecycle. And Box has evolved their business, I think, better than most companies in the market in terms of having an externally focused, non-myopic view of how to compete. And it shows in their performance. Converting to free trials to paid subscriptions. You have a lot of tuning parameters that exist at your disposal. Is your focus longevity of relationship, and therefore I'm going to incentivize the free to paid on a long duration? Or is your motivation cash flow? I want to convert millions of users potentially at microtransactions. A lot of these tuning parameters apply as you evolve from free to paid. And I would suggest to you that 100% of the companies that I've worked with, and I've seen 500 monetization strategies in the last 2.5 years, none of them, ourselves included, ever get it right. They launch, they iterate, they learn, they reiterate, and it becomes a life cycle by which they fine-tune the adoption rate and their top-line drivers, churn reduction or top-line revenue. Not all customers are the same. When I started talking about who has multiple subscriptions, we have to meet these consumers in the way that they want to be met. And the market's preconditioned for that. Ning increased subscribers from 17,000 to 100,000 in 12 months with 500% revenue increase. And how did they do that? They made, off of the same product platform, the same product, because there's, in my world, the complexity of what you're trying to solve for subscription billing is no less, whether you're a 5-person startup or you're HP that's running your cloud billing. It's the same problem. And so goes it with content. How do I serve a market at an SMB level, but also enterprise? And Ning was able to figure out that perfect mix and that rationalization of their product strategy to attack each of those consumer segments. One of the areas that we've taken a lot of lessons from is the cloud. And the cloud has spent a lot of time, particularly on the infrastructure as a service part of it, in building very sophisticated stacks and all of the technical infrastructure and plumbing. And a lot of effort has gone into the management of those stacks. But we're now shifting to monetization. And so the market is, Amazon really set the pace here. If you want to look at an interesting usage model, pay as you go in arrears, look at Amazon EC2 or look at S3 for their distribution strategies. This is the ultimate. Sign up, no pre-commitment of service, we'll pay you on every dimension of utilization, on bandwidth utilized for the applications, on number of servers, on storage, on how much you spend on time in the application. And so cloud has really informed the bulk of these models that are required to monetize digital content today. 3 years ago, we used to get customers in who would say, we don't know if you can fit our use case. Well, today, with the customer base that we have 100 units of measure and it's configurable. So if you want to charge by how many articles you've downloaded, or you want to charge by how much you've consumed, or how much time you've spent on an app, or it's all configurable. And I think the cloud model is really well defined in this usage, pay-as-you-go, in arrears, soft touch. And volume and tiering and usage has become a real underpinning of monetization. you can think of it in this way. I start with a commitment of $100 a month, and I get 100 units of X, and every unit over is Y. Well, what happens when I go to the 101st or the 110th or the 122nd unit? Is there an individual charge per unit? Is there a premeditated strategy to upsell you to the next level? And do you tie that to billing frequency? You only get that extra level and reduced price if you commit longer. And so there's 5 or 6 tuning parameters in each of these models, and they start with really the following. Billing frequency, meeting your consumer whether they want to have the access for an hour, a day, a month, a quarter, a year, or multi-year, whether they want to prepay or pay as you go. If we're doing our job right in an earned edition basis, we're going to start with product A and immediately add A1 or A2 over that lifetime value. With usage, it's about pay as you go and overage charges and converting that. And then just think about the distribution of one product applicably globally. There's regional differences that apply in this monetization. And then promos is probably the last area where we see tremendous opportunity. The renewal curve has an interesting opportunity around churn. You have passive churn, where your subscriber just evaporates and you don't know why. But there's many, many interaction points, all the way from the front office on your e-commerce site to your customer support representatives to actually amend and influence that behavior. To me, and in all subscription businesses, and the way Wall Street rewards and values subscription businesses, it's about churn defense. If I can keep you as a customer by giving you 3 extra months for free at the point you're calling me to tell me how dissatisfied you are with my service, that's really valuable. And so we have to contemplate not just the front-end monetization, but the back-end churn defense that goes along with it. So in summary, I think if you look across this market that we've been living in, the top line is revenue growth and monetization, of course, but in the way that the consumers and companies and individuals would like to work. There's no longer B2B, B2C, enterprise consumer. It's B to any. Churn defense I've just described. Box is a great example of a company and many others who are changing their pricing and packaging by being externally focused and creating offers and promos in particular markets that take advantage of that information latency that Howard described. If you don't drive this way competitively, it's going to be handed to you anyway, because the markets are preconditioned. They're already buying this way. And so if you think that your model that you're fixed on today that's working and driving your revenue is working over an extended period of time, I can tell you that it's not going to sustain itself. New incumbent competitors are disrupting every day. Netflix is disrupting Blockbuster. Zipcar is disrupting GM. Airbnb, B&B is disrupting Marriott, and on and on and on. So the strategies are multiple. I look forward to a vigorous discussion this evening, and thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Now, I'd like to have Betsy. I learned a new set of words, churn defense. Not a set that I had known of that.
I like that.
I like that. I like the phrase a lot. Exactly. I think I'm going to use it as well.
I'm going to add 2 data points to the short bio that Howard just gave earlier of me. I was at CBS News. I was also the CEO of the Huffington Post. And my job, that's all right. My job now, and Howard danced around it a little bit for this New York audience, but I won't because it's fundamental to what we're going to talk about tonight. My job now, I took a job in January to run a business called The Blaze, which most of you, probably many of you haven't heard of, but you have heard of my boss. So The Blaze is owned by Mercury Radio Arts, which is owned by Glenn Beck. So I've gone to the very opposite side of the political spectrum, and a lot of my peers and friends in the industry say I'm completely insane for working with somebody who is known to be a little bit unusual in his presentation. What's really interesting is both businesses, both CBSNews.com and Huffington Post were ad-supported, right? So my experience as a media professional has been in ad-supported businesses. And one of the reasons I was really interested in going to work with Glenn and Mercury is because the way he is monetizing his brand and Mercury's monetizing its brand, and we plan at the Blaze to monetize our brand, which is just 14 months old, is through a lot of different ways. Isn't just through advertising. Advertising is one part. Advertising and sponsorship is one part. Ticketing for live events is another part. Commerce and group buying. There's a group buying site called Markdown that's part of the business. And what's kind of most relevant, and it was really interesting to hear Shawn speak, and Paul as well, is a subscription business that was launched 13 weeks ago, called GBTV, named after Glenn, that is $10 a month for an IP-delivered internet network that at launch, and we haven't released any numbers since launch, we will after the first of the year, I believe, since at launch, we were at 230,000 subscribers. So you can do the math. 230,000 subscribers, $10 a month, very low churn because it's a very, very loyal audience at that core. When Glenn was on Fox News, he was doing 2.5 million people a month, and some people say, 230,000 people versus 2.5 million people, or 2.5 million people a day watching Fox. Gee, that's a big difference in the number. But the difference is we've eliminated the middleman, right? That's a relationship that Mercury now has directly to its customer. As Shawn said, the idea that there's no one model that works is exactly right. And I think in the media industry, we waited, we're waiting for Paul in the New York Times to put up the paywall and see how it worked, because we'd all use it or not use it if it didn't work. And what we sort of found is, kind of paywalls sort of work for some folks and not for others, and they kind of work in different circumstances. And it's a real morphing, evolving opportunity. And in addition to that, businesses that include paywalls, subscription walls, they include advertising. So there's advertising in GBTV, real kind of traditional TV-like 30-second spot advertising. All those hybrid models are really important, and the idea of being flexible in your business is really important. The other thing that's really important is, and Shawn said it, is knowing who owns the customer. That if you know your audience and you know how they respond to your business, you have a direct relationship with them, you can begin to, technology has so many different ways, and Shawn's business and the technology that Paul's using in the New York Times, so many different ways to kind of play with, I'll give you a little bit, this costs a little bit more, it costs a little bit less, it's 20 free articles, it's 30 free articles, it's 10 free articles, but you can't move any of those levers if you don't know your audience, and you don't know who your audience is, you don't know how they're reacting. And that's why I think for content creators, iTunes is so kind of scary. I mean, so great in so many ways, but so scary because that's all behind the Apple wall. And media companies, I think, are just beginning to figure that out, that there's a simplicity and an ease of use in using something like Apple, and we're great that they were out early with iTunes, but being able to deploy technology against your business, against your content, against your product, that you can get that direct, real-time feedback is incredibly important. And I look forward to the discussion.
Thanks very much. It's one of the questions I think we do want to discuss later on is Apple, because they are loved and hated by most people who are producing content. Richard Reisman, Teleshuttle.
Thank you. Hello. What I'd like to do is sort of step back and change to a look at what are the fundamentals here and how can we look at it differently to try and get a different perspective on ways to solve these problems, looking a little more forward, stuff that I think is usable right now, but I think will be increasingly important in the future. So there's two major problems which are also opportunities, I think, that apply to digital content. One is what you can think of as a long tail of price sensitivity, which is really the demand curve, the fact that different people will pay different amounts for your content. So if you look at this, the green box is really at a set price. That's the revenue you get at your set price. The people to the left on that curve are the people willing to pay your set price or more. And the point is that even though a lot of those people would pay more, that red area is revenue that you're leaving on the table because they only pay the set price. The other side of that is the long tail. there's huge numbers of people, depending on your price, who aren't willing to pay what your set price is. So that's a lost opportunity, even though many of those people might pay a significant fraction of your, is this on a timer? Pay a significant fraction of what your set price is. So there's a lot of revenue there that you're leaving. Now, this is also hard to deal with because it's really dynamic. It depends on the context. It's not a simple curve. It just generally has that shape. The other thing, of course, is what Howard was talking about at the beginning. Digital products are different. There's no marginal cost, more or less. You're basically selling entitlements to access, not so much the product itself, but some access to the product in different ways. I'm sorry, that confused me there. So you can measure all of this, and you can use free as a selling tool, which obviously a lot of people are doing. We've got freemium, which is very popular. People have actually made pay what you want work in a lot of contexts. The question is, what else can you do to take advantage of these opportunities? So the thing that I'm suggesting is really critical and a major opportunity is to view this holistically and not view it as single transactions, but optimizing your price over the life of the relationship with the customer. And of course, you risk a few transactions in order to seek this win-win relationship over time. And the other aspect of doing that is to reintegrate discovery and testing deeply into the process so that you're tracking what people are doing based on online capabilities. You've got rich usage instrumentation and rich dialogue that lets you bring a new level of understanding of your customer. So that's one of the opportunities, I think, to exploit. The other opportunity is sort of an interesting idea, and John Blossom gave me this example, and he did a blog post a few weeks ago on Fair Pay that gives you this nice example of the Spanky and our gang, the Little Rascals, were doing a play where they were trying to charge a penny admission to their friends. And all their friends are saying, well, how do we know it's any good? Why should we pay a penny? So Spanky says, well, here's what I'll do. You go in and see the play, and if you like what you see, you pay me as you exit. So they say, well, that's fair enough. We'll try that. And they all go in and watch the play. So that's something which hardly anyone is doing in the online world, and it's very easy to do online because you can track and you can go back to people and say, okay, now pay me. So how do we use this? And this is sort of an architecture, and this is the basic process. You can do variations, but the heart of it, I think, is kind of basic. You start with a gated offer to a given amount of entitlement for a given amount of time on the upper left. So you make an offer like a subscription, a month, 2 months, you try it. And the deal is you're going to try it, see if you like it, and then you set the price afterwards as a fair price. So that's sort of like pay as you exit. I call it price it backward. But what we're adding is now on the internet, you can track that price. And you can see, how did that customer pay? And you can assess it, is it fair to the seller? And then based on that, you extend the offer forward if they're fair. And you say, okay, I'm going to make more offers. And if they paid a good price, I'm going to give better offers. If it's a low price, I'm going to give more limited offers. You can tune it. So now you've got an incentive for people to pay fairly based on their actual value, and you make this into a continuing process where you're constantly motivating them, making new offers, and balancing to figure out exactly what they need, what they will pay, and how to serve them. So that's sort of the heart of it. To the customers, it's obviously kind of attractive because you pay what seems fair after you try it, and you just agree to do that fairly and to explain why. So you can have forms where you set predefined reasons so it's easy to process and analyze. You can allow for a free-form input, and you present this as a privilege that's revocable if they don't behave well. So from the seller side, of course, the real question is, do I get enough control and predictability? Do they pay enough? The heart of this is, some of the words are framing, nudging, and tracking. You can think of it as a managed dialogue, a choice architecture, where when it's time to ask for pricing, after they've used it, the seller reports the usage, provides a suggested price schedule based on what they used and how, and the buyer sets the price in terms of a differential from that suggested price. So then you can state, the buyer states their reasons, and then the seller can evaluate the fairness of those reasons and then decide whether or not to frame new offers. And you can think of this as managing fair pay credit. If they're credit worthy, you give them better and better offers. If they're not so credit worthy, you don't. So you're constantly nudging them toward the suggested prices as they evolve, and you're constantly testing and reviewing the value propositions and the offers, framings, and incentives as you go along. So this, we can get into in Q&A if anyone wants the details, but you can think of this as a value discovery engine that's doing this framing, nudging, and tracking. You're coexisting with a conventional price zone because it's probably a good baseline, but now you've got this engine that on the right is looking at value and fairness and feeding that back in to make offers. And you're sorting your users based on how they pay and what offers you're going to make them. So you can vary that in a lot of ways, but that's sort of the heart of the process. So what you're doing is getting a real dialogue with your customers, and you're getting a new level of market research that never existed. You can get dynamic price and value discovery data, real willingness to pay, and specific to the actual product, the buyer, and the context. So you use the profile-based offer models, these trials, which are mutual discovery, and I'm suggesting this can get you to higher margins and much deeper market penetration. So where can this apply? Pretty much any kind of subscription or ongoing service, and also in aggregators, iTunes, Amazon app stores could be doing it as well. In terms of how you can do it at a single vendor level. The New York Times could do it, the Blaze could do it. You can also do it cross-vendor where there's added leverage because now you have shared infrastructure and shared processes. So someone like Zuora could provide this as a service. There's also an important new dimension here, which is the fair pay reputation database, this data you're collecting, because across vendors, you're collecting it for lots of vendors in detail, and it becomes sort of like a credit rating database, where now, even if you don't know a customer who comes to you very well, you can look them up and say, what's his reputation, and get a fair amount of detail about that, and decide what kind of offers to make. So I think that's a major database asset and a first mover advantage for a platform environment. Just a couple other comments on why this can be valuable. One is it's a way to do usage and value pricing that's buyer friendly. Lots of people like flat rates. They don't like ticking meters and usage shock. But now you're pricing considering usage, but it's the buyer that sets the price. So they can factor in volume discounts. They can soften the extremes and average it out. They don't have to go exactly to what they used, but it roughly tracks to volume, and you can push them to more or less track to volume. More generally, this gets you into a way to do price discrimination in a way that's accepted by the buyer, because you're not discriminating on the buyer, you're getting the buyer to self-discriminate. So you're engaging them in a process where they decide what's the fair price in their context, and you can do segmentation in any number of dimensions, including ability to pay, context, and all these other kinds of things. So where do you start? This is a slide I won't get into detail, but the one way to look at it is over the life cycle of the transaction. You can start at the beginning and use it like a fuzzy freemium, where you don't have a hard line between free and paid. You have this fuzzy fair pay line as to what's free and what's paid for new customers. You can use it at the other end on a retention scheme. If you've got people canceling, you can say, well, wait a minute, we'll try this as a fair pay thing, and there's almost no risk because you've lost them anyway. You can also do it by segments, high segments, low segments, give them the cream to get your premium people, do low-end segments. There's all kinds of ways to cut this. So it's really a flexible architecture that can be tuned in a lot of ways. So that's sort of the basic idea. Again, the dynamic is you keep cycling through the process. You've got this balance of forces between the buyer setting his price, but the seller controlling the offers. So that, I think, is going to converge on a much better economic solution than the tools we're using now, and I think that works in a modern online environment. So that's basically what I wanted to cover now. We can there's more time for Q&A, and I'm happy to do consults with anyone who wants to look at how this applies to a specific business. Thank you.
So we have about a half an hour, a little bit less, to get some questions and comments. I know the audience has some. Let me throw out one or two to the panel first. One thing that nobody's really talked about, and over the last decade I've seen dozens of startup plans, is micropayments. So we've all talked about sort of macro $10 a month, in my New York Times crossword, $39 a year, or whatever it is I'm paying now. Do you see a future for micropayments, and if so, where?
I see a future for it. I think we looked at it, actually. We looked at it.
Are these on?
We looked at micropayments and looked at about a dozen different models and settled on the approach we took. But the reason we decided against it was you can get swamped in the transaction costs associated with micropayments in a way that you don't with annual or monthly subscriptions. And we also knew we had a loyal base. We were tapping into latent demand and wanted to retain those people. And the best way to do that is to get them on monthly or annual recurring billing sorts of arrangements. Sure. But I think at some stage when we have tapped out that demand, there will be additional demand in the long tail, that Richard is referring to, where people will want to just unlock an article after they've reached a reading limit. And I'm totally open to building the technology and marketing that sort of offering. But right now, the juice is not worth the squeeze from our perspective.
Yep.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that this is a distributed, complex problem. And I think if you're in a market share capture mode in a launch in your first year, it's a viable strategy, and you're willing to undertake that, particularly when it's a greenfield environment. But as you get more complex on the offering and the distribution to fulfill, whether it's a provision process or it's a frictionless e-commerce front end that's taking a credit card payment and the associated transaction fees, I think the economic model is a little disrupted in the revenues and top line that you can drive against the associated fulfillment costs. And so we see it as market share capture for launch services that evolve into a much broader monetization strategy over time. But as a sustainable business, it's difficult.
Yep.
I mean, the technology is certainly there. I think it applies more, as Paul said, to archival content.
Yeah, we also see it applying and beginning to be applied to gameplay.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
The gamers, with tokens and so on. Let me throw out one more question, then I'll go to the audience, and that is Apple. The New York Times, you've got the Apple editions of various, I don't know how many I've had over the years on my iPhones and iPads. You've got the 30% that they want to take if you want to run your channels there. How do you guys feel about their role in all of this?
Well, let me say Apple's a very good partner of ours, and we're subject to a non-disclosure. But I think all publishers are a little ambivalent about Apple, as you said at the outset. They are a huge distribution fire hose, and it's kind of like if you want to sell consumer packaged goods, you have to have a relationship with Walmart. If you want to sell digital media goods, you need to have a relationship with Apple, and if you don't, you could potentially suffer. There are people out there like FT who've chosen to go direct and have pulled out of the Apple Store and now have a web app, and they have 1 million users on that. So that's an interesting experiment out there. But you have to believe that the 30% that you pay and some of the customer information you give up is worth the incremental volume you're getting, and for us it is so far.
You really want that response in real time, and to be able to see on an hourly basis, on a daily basis, who looked at your content, who didn't, who signed up, who left you. I think that's far more important than the rev share. I mean, the rev share is painful, but being able to react in real time to how your audience is behaving, Apple just doesn't allow you to do.
Yeah, I think if you look at our customers at Financial Times or News Corp or Reed Elsevier or many of the others, it's and Apple, not for Apple. And I think it's important. The notion of owning that customer endpoint is so critical in terms of monetization. And if you're, again, if you're sort of, I shared the example of the customer that's 40 million free subscribers. Is that good or bad? I don't know. Maybe their ad revenue is supporting it, but I don't think it is. And so it's Apple and whatever that strategy may be, because you have to monetize that way.
Do you have any questions from the audience? Sure.
Richard, in listening to what you said, I collect things, and so I often buy in auctions. So here, in some funny way, you're auctioning something up, but I'm not bidding against anybody else. I'm sort of bidding against the seller and myself, which the thing that begins to concern me is, let's say I have a friend who looks at the same content, and I pay $4 for it. And I talk to him the next day at breakfast, and he paid $2 for it. Next time, I'm like, how do you deal with that issue? And the second thing is, could you begin to put value on people? For example, you could revolutionize the whole dating site business, putting everyone up there for free and just charging more to get contacts with more interesting people. You can do it.
Yeah. Well, okay. Yeah, those are good questions. The first one is, are people going to compare prices and is it a race to the bottom because everybody's going to figure out what the price is? But I think you can avoid that because you really want to do this in a way that's very context specific. And so the price for you is going to be different than the price for somebody else. And there are going to be reasons for that. It's going to be how they used it, what they can afford, whether it's a business use, a personal use, time of day. There's all kinds of reasons. So it's going to be so complicated to compare prices in a meaningful way that I think you can largely avoid that issue. There will be some people that will try and push to the bottom, but a significant number won't. And the other one, what was the other part?
Yeah.
You can do this. You can put different values of
Oh, yeah.
access to different people.
Yeah, absolutely. It can be you can use almost any dimension you want to the extent that you can capture it and repeat it back to the customer and say, this is a criteria and this is why the value is higher. So it really gets to true value pricing, where what is the value to that customer?
Well, it's also the value to, like, the airlines call it yield management, right? I
Exactly.
mean, I get on the plane and the person next to me has paid half of what I paid. And I know in the early 2000 period when it was really, there was a lot of issues there, my view with United Airlines was, I'm okay paying twice as much as the guy or woman next to me, but I'm not okay paying 10 times as much. And when it got to the point where the deltas were literally, $2,000 for a round-trip LA ticket versus $200 if you bought, overlapping routes and all, and hidden city and all, then I started to play the game because there's a point in that yield management at which you feel foolish, and I think that's one of those things that has to be done. Question? Yep. No, they're up to the left, back there first. We'll get you next.
Hi, thanks for some interesting data. I had a question that is not directly about digital content, but somewhat derivative. I mean, what we're talking about is monetizing digital assets, and I think the audience aggregation that you guys are able to deliver can also be monetized different ways. So I was very interested to hear that you're starting a group buy mechanism of some kind.
Right.
And I was also interested to hear that the New York Times has a different strategy for remnant space. And those are all sort of alternative revenue streams to, making the audience pay or straight advertising. And I'm just wondering whether that's growing, whether that's something you guys are exploring, and where you think this is headed.
Well, I think it goes back to, and I sound like a broken record, but I think it goes back to understanding your audience and understanding what your relationship is with your audience, what your audience wants from you, and what you can provide to them authentically. And in our case, Markdown, our group buying business, the tagline is value and values. So we find value. It's a very sort of Glenn Beck phrase, value and values. And for the audience, it feels like and it's been a very successful and authentic way to engage that audience. I don't think, if you took Katie Couric or if you took Katie Couric and tried to do the same thing, that audience might not respond the same way. I mean, there's certainly, Oprah's such a great example out there, and you look at what she's done and hasn't done in terms of her relationship with her audience when she has monetized and hasn't monetized. She's another brand that you kind of wonder, like, you know, Oprah, you could have a group buying business, you know, why didn't you get into that business? Is that an opportunity? I don't think every brand can do that. The Times has, and you guys are probably doing gangbusters this time of year, you've got a pretty good archive, historical, buy the newspaper on the day you were born, buy the newspaper on a historic date business. It's a nice little business for the Times.
It is a nice little business, yeah.
It's never going to be $100 million business.
No, not that one. But yeah, it's a highly profitable business. But are you talking about sort of a situation where I, as a reader, encounter the pay gateway, and instead of paying, I have an option to watch a video, for example, in order to snooze the gateway and go beyond? And is that the kind of technology you're talking about, and whether that's growing or?
No, it's a
Okay.
bit more further afield than that, which is you have millions of people coming to you interested in certain topics.
Yeah.
Why would you not be able to monetize that by selling them those things that they may be interested in?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So-
Directly, or, you know, in an affiliate fashion.
Yeah, so to Betsy's point, we do have an archived article, you know, business for folks who are looking for long-tail articles within certain time ranges and are beyond their 20-meter article limit. So, yeah.
By the way, just what you mentioned, we did at my yearbook, one of the first round companies, which focuses on high school students. You got free tokens. You could buy tokens, but if you didn't want to pay, you could watch a movie trailer for the weekend, and you had the choice. So, you know, watch the movie trailer for 30 seconds or whatever time it would took, so on. So you had one over here.
Thank you. I'm not a specialist in this space, so my questions can be a little bit too broad, but I was wondering how you address working with Google, Facebook, and social media, and much of the free content that is floating around, and how to monetize, say, some content that's floating around, say, you know, like a video content on YouTube and so forth.
So our view is we remain committed to being part of the open web. That's very important for us. So, as I said, I think in my remarks, if you come to our content through a third-party referrer, search, portal, social, blogger, you will never risk encountering the gateway. Once you then go deeper into the site or into our content, it's possible that you could, depending on how deeply you engage. So that's a really important part of our strategy. We've been very clear about it. A lot of people thought we were maybe being a little schizophrenic, and it would somehow dampen demand, and subscribers would be upset about it. But you know, the reality is, if you're trying to replicate the reading experience by going through search or social, it's not a very good way to we think, engage with our content. But if you're just a casual reader coming in through those sources, that's something we want to encourage. Hopefully, over time, we get those users to register and ultimately subscribe. So it's part of sort of an acquisition funnel broadly.
I wanted to make a brief comment on that, if I can. We're seeing across a lot of industries the distribution between free and then the things that are valuable are peer review and network creation. So if I know you and we're friends, you will put me a peer review or community impact that guides me to relevant content, particularly as content explodes. I think there's a whole sentiment management and mining function that's going to feed you the stuff that you want, because as the content explodes now, it becomes about personalization and search. So if you want the higher value specific content to you, that might be a chargeable service versus the broad free. And we're starting to see a distribution between those two, particularly when it's things like cable TV with 900 channels. How do you get served to you exactly what you want, and are you willing to pay for that convenience and access?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In the analog world, the notion of ownership has been a bit softer and friendlier than what we see with digital ownership. For example, if I bought a newspaper, I could read it wherever I wanted. I could give it to my friends and family, or even to to a homeless person when I'm done with it. In the digital world, it turns out that I need a separate ownership on an Apple device, a separate ownership on an Android device, a separate ownership in the web browser. So how are you coping with this? How are you sort of maintaining a single ownership?
That's not true for us. If you're an unlimited digital access subscriber, all digital access subscriber rather, you can, with one username and password, access our content across any platform. If you're a home delivery subscriber, with one username and password, you can access our content across any platform. That was a really important part of what we did in terms of building the model.
And you can be logged in different places.
Yeah, and you can be logged in across multiple devices. So at least for us, as a subscriber, there's that sense of federated identity, and we spent a lot of money making sure the technology would enable that kind of experience for users. So we're not asking people to separately purchase and authenticate through various platforms. You can generate one, you have one login and use that across.
And on the video
devices.
side, which is kind of interesting, I don't know how many of you have used, well, probably not, because Time Warner Cable doesn't carry it here yet, but HBO Go, that, HBO Go has 3 logins. So if you're an HBO Go subscriber, you could be, and it's not authenticated to, are you sitting at home and are you connecting through your Time Warner Cable broadband? So what's kind of interesting is I do think that content creators and the middlemen and the end users are really wrestling with that, because I think that's really interesting, the sharing function of, I finished the newspaper, I'm giving it to my neighbor, and kind of the multiple login is a little bit cheating in that, it's supposed to be you on 3 different devices, but I think you're seeing some family sharing.
Well, the courts are also getting involved. In the first use doctrine, which is first sale doctrine, which basically for physical goods, once you own it, you can do what you want with it. There's been some recent decisions with respect to CDs and the music on a CD, and if you've digitized it, which you can do, what can you do with one copy of it as long as you delete it from your machine, and can you sell it to someone else? Some decisions are saying yes. Most recently, there's a lot of furor, turmoil going on in the music industry over that one, but it is different. I've always been frustrated that I can't finish a book on the Kindle and give it to my daughter to read on her Kindle. Amazon has made some steps towards that direction now. You can share
The
a book
lending
for
stuff, yeah.
3 weeks or there's some kind of stuff going on there, but it is a big question.
They're trying.
Related to that, it's sort of interesting. I think Time Warner started this TV Anywhere push, which now they're calling Content Anywhere, and there's a whole ultraviolet group in the industry that's working on technology so that you can have access to the stuff from any device, anywhere, if you subscribe to it. So I think the industry is moving away from that device-specific thing, even though some publishers are sort of jumped on the iPad app as this is the way we can get money, where we can't get it anywhere
I think that's
else.
because of the technical hurdles involved in creating that federated identity. That's not easy to do.
Yeah.
But I also think it's the use case. I mean, you're not giving your iPhone to a homeless person, right? So, or you're not typically giving your laptop to your loved one to read what you're reading. I mean, it is a bit different user experience. But I think we, for example, offer shared access. So if you're a home delivery customer or you're an all digital access customer, you can sign up a spouse or someone in your household to share that account as a benefit of your subscription. And I think, you can imagine people offering something similar to what you see with telecom providers, like a family plan. That would make sense for someone like you if you want to have everyone in your household on one subscription.
But to accomplish this, you had to opt out of the Apple's own sort of payments and entitlement system.
No. So initially, we were selling through our own e-commerce system. Then in June, as many people may know, they required all publishers to use their e-commerce system. Still, in all, we absolutely sort of require, as part of the purchase process there, that you give us a username, an email address, and password that we can use to authenticate you and federate your identity across all of our platforms. So that's baked into the Apple purchase flow for us.
Yeah. In the back there?
Hi. Just a question. And considering the flexible payments you discussed as well as the long tail, I was thinking about the pay-per-action model, and if there's been any recent success or if you know about any successes with that model recently.
I haven't seen pay per action as much as I've seen pay for access or pay per use in arrears. Not a clickable transaction that's incremented on the fly, but rather I'm in here, I burst beyond a certain trigger, and they're often trigger and tier related, where I use a certain level and then I trigger and trip a different rate in arrears. I haven't personally seen in many deployments to date this notion of action-oriented pricing that's dynamic in play. I think it's more of a domain of a lot of the gaming, where you're now maybe acquiring or utilizing virtual currencies to power up in flight or acquire in flight in the play. And I think I've seen it mostly in the gaming context.
Yeah. Back over on that side.
Shawn, and when you were talking about the 40 million free members to your site, and can that be monetized? What's wrong with those types of companies becoming distribution companies like Apple and saying, we got 40 million people, we're going to call up all the record labels and we're going to distribute our IP through our site, and all sorts of products similar with the New York Times. Would it be awkward to have another division that's a sell-through division?
Yeah, I think what happens is that works if the product is relatively simple on a $10 a month monetization strategy. But what happens, and there's an 800-pound gorilla coming, and what that problem is distribution. And what's going to happen is as you add these models that we've been describing this evening, and you export those to an aggregator or then a reseller or an ISV or distributor or app store or otherwise, and you add usage constructs, which has got that complexity, you distribute that pain point downstream. And it is coming. And we have just started to automate that extended supply chain so that you can do that. And there is no reason why you wouldn't, but there's a but here, which is if you don't anticipate the way that consumer wants to buy, because the aggregator is often bundling. They're taking your service plus, and you're adding usage into the conversation and entitlement, as Paul described, for a day, week, month, year, hour. That is going to really impact distribution networks over the next 12 to 18 months. And we're really ahead of that curve right now. We've got a number of customers that are now automating a distributed supply chain with content so that they don't break the distribution model. So there's no reason why, but it's coming, and it's at the very, very infancy to be able to solve that distribution problem.
And by the way, you referred to the cable networks before. I mean, I buy HBO, Showtime, et cetera, from Comcast or Time Warner here in New York, and the information doesn't always get back, so they don't always, and they have the same issues, whereas, as Betsy says, you really, knowing your customer is such a powerful thing. But one more back on the back there.
Thank you. I guess my question comes more from the content creator aspect. And one of the things that, I guess I have to do is promise whatever investor that I'm going to be able to return their money, and that's kind of why this is important to me. But with regards to what I see developing now, in fact, I think one of the founders of the Huffington Post began a company where they create channels, actual web channels to distribute video content. And I was wondering, with regards to that model, particularly with video, what would you say is the utility of an individual content creator developing, following that model and developing their own channel versus, per se, utilizing existing websites, frameworks, and actually renting space? So say, for example, X person develops X web series, utilizing New York Times or the Huffington Post, which can target whether it's the viewer or target customers directly based on interest. Is there any model by which someone may rent out basically space via the Huffington Post to push forward their product and perhaps work out a system where the ad I guess the ad aspect doesn't come into conflict, or I don't know if that makes some sense, but.
You know, I think what's really interesting is, you know, here HuffPost was developed on a model that aggregated a lot of content. So, you know, we were taking in, we were sort of seeing 1,500, 10,000 news sources and picking the best and aggregating in a model that sometimes pushed back to the content originator. It didn't always push directly back to the content originator. They've now become so big at 40, 50 million UVs a month. They can be big enough, you know, as such a great destination where they could begin to rent out that space, and certainly I'm sure has had of recent conversations. The challenge is you're then, as the person renting that space, you know, there's a plus and a minus. The plus is that you're in an environment that's reaching 50 million people a month. The minus is that you kind of have to play by their rules in terms of their brand, right? You have to make your content and your brand align with their big umbrella silo brand. So for a content creator, it's got sort of pluses and minuses. Certainly the reach is important. Look, Yahoo's still doing, you know, YouTube does 80 million UVs a month. Yahoo does 100 million UVs a month just on news, I believe, or some crazy number still. You know, those places to get eyeballs and expose a new brand to eyeballs are still really, really important.
Well, and YouTube has just announced that they're putting $250 million out to develop channels. There's a bunch of companies. I was out in LA 2 weeks ago, Machinima, Full Screen, Big Frame, that are doing exactly that. And that tells us that we're about out of time, that are trying to help people particularly with video content. So we are at the end. I really want to thank our panel members, Richard and Betsy and Shawn and Paul. And I guess we now have